Back when the children of Israel, and we've been talking a little bit about the past, and we were actually talking about Jeremiah and what he wrote, which was the book of Lamentations. And we looked at a couple of chapters there, and the Lamentations was the very last part of the existence of the nation of Israel and Judah before they're being carried away captive into Babylon. Now they came back and to the land for a little while, and but they never had the extent as they had back under David and Solomon and the kings, and when they had their own nation. And so we are looking now at the end, the beginning of their existence as a nation, which we kind of call them the children of Israel at that point, because they were not Israel and Judah. And so the children of Israel, because what? They were born of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, and they came to 12 patriarchs. Were the sons of Jacob, and they had 12 tribes of Israel, and they were the children of Israel. And they came out of Egypt, and as they wandered in the wilderness, they received laws and instructions. And we know some of them as the Ten Commandments. There were 613 laws in the Old Testament. And so as they began to learn those things, God also showed Moses what they needed to do for a place of worship. And since they were wandering around, he built a tent. And this is what God had told them to do. It was called the tabernacle. And in the tabernacle was the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was, on top of that, was what was called the mercy seat. The mercy seat was a place that God dwelt. You might call it his throne if you wanted to do that. And over the mercy seat were two cherubim, two angels, or you might call them archangels. Now, they weren't real angels, okay? They were real pieces of artwork, but they weren't living angels. They weren't living and breathing. But they represented the archangels, one of which is Michael. The other one became known as Lucifer later on, the one who fell, and we call him the devil. And but they overshadowed the mercy seat, and the very glory, the actual presence of God existed inside of the Holy of Holies, over the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. His glory actually existed there. Consequently, God in his glory, as we know of him, God in his glory would consume anything that is touched by sin, and therefore he had to be separated from common humanity. And the priest only one time a year could go in to the Holy of Holies of all and see the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant wasn't very big. It was about as big as that coffee table, although it was about twice that height, maybe a little wider. And the whole thing was like, why? Because two men had to carry it around. And when they went into battle, they carried the Ark of the Covenant. When they moved from place to place, it would go before them. When they crossed the Jordan River, the first thing that hit the water was the foot of the priest that was carrying the Holy of Holies, or not the Holy of Holies, but the Ark of the Covenant that resided normally in the Holy of Holies. They would cover it whenever they carried it around. But that was where the glory of God actually existed on the earth. God dwelling with men, actually, or we call that the Shekinah glory. Now we are going to learn a little bit about what it looked like. Now this is kind of interesting here to me, maybe not to you, but so in verse 1 of Ezekiel chapter 1, if you've got your old Scofield, it's page 840, and it says in verse 1, right after Lamentations, where we've been studying the past couple of weeks. Now it came to pass in the 13th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day, who cares, as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heavens were open, and I saw visions of God. Where was he? The river Chebar, and that was in Babylon. That was in Babylon. So he is in captivity at this time. Interestingly enough, what we are about to read happened before Lamentations. How can that be? Because before Lamentations was written, the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. They conquered Jerusalem, and they carried a large portion of the population to Babylon. And among them Ezekiel, apparently, at that time, and a guy named Belshazzar, and another guy named Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, 4 guys there. You might know them by Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That was their Hebrew names, but their names were changed in Babylon to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Daniel was his name. So they were carried away at that time, okay? Now, then Ezekiel is there, so apparently he was carried away with them, with the captives. And let's see what happens here. Let's skip down to verse 3. It says, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel, the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans, by the river Chebar, and the hand of the Lord was there upon him. And then in verse 9 he says, and I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north. Okay, just so you can visualize, because we're going to hear about directions quite a bit, and you probably don't care. But if you looked at a map of Israel, now you would have Babylon was over here, and the river Euphrates here, and the Tigris River here, and Babylon was right in between them, when it kind of came together there before they entered the Gulf down there. And then Israel was over here, and the Mediterranean Sea was further over there, and north was this way on the map. North was this way. So when you talk about north, you're looking at that. Now, visualize, if you will, the temple way over there, okay? But let's visualize it and kind of blow it up. Say now it's large, and it faced east. The main entrance was to the east. That would be the eastern gate, was to the east. Wait a minute, north, that's north, right? Okay, so that would be east toward Babylon. They were looking east toward Babylon. You went through the eastern gate going into the city, which would be going like this, right? Go through the eastern gate going into the city, and you would enter directly into the temple. But you'd go across a courtyard called the Court of the Gentiles, and you would enter into a ladies' court, and then you would the Gentiles couldn't go into the ladies' court. If you're not a Jew, you couldn't go in there. And nobody could go in there but Jewish ladies and the men. And then inside of that began the temple that corresponded to the tabernacle. And there was the holy place. Before the holy place, there was the altar where they made all the sacrifices. And then inside of that was the laver, where every time they walked by it, they'd wash themselves. And so there was quite a large laver there. And then inside of that was the holy place. Inside the holy place was a table with the shewbread, and on the other side was candlesticks, a menorah, a big huge menorah there, and to give light. And then they came to the veil, and in front of the veil was probably the incense, the altar of incense. Although there is some wording there that may indicate that the altar of incense was inside the Holy of Holies with the Ark of the Covenant. And then the place where only the high priest once a year could go was in the Holy of Holies. That's where the glory of God, the Shekinah glory, where it abode, on the earth. The only place that God visibly abode on the earth until Jesus came in his flesh. But he was not in his glory. Otherwise, he couldn't have walked with sinful men. They'd have been consumed by the brightness of his glory. Now that we understand those things, that's where we are. We're looking at, actually you'll find that later, you might find this surprising. And so, but let's real quickly in verse 4. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north. Now, he's not in Jerusalem, he's in Babylon. A great cloud and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it. Out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. Now, this was the whirlwind. Okay, you ever heard, did any of you see the movie about the tornado? Twister. Oh yeah, there was a thing on, and I don't know if they still have it there, but a Twister. And that's actually what he's talking about, the whirlwind. But there was not just this twister, there was lightning and fire and amber and stuff, but this is what he's describing here. And out of the midst thereof was the color of amber. Verse 5, also out of the midst thereof came likeness of 4 living creatures. You might take note of those. Those are what we call the cherubs. Now the Ark of the Covenant only had 2. The cherubim. And let's see what they're like. Out of this came 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They had a likeness of a man, and every one of them had 4 faces. Now, that sounds kind of strange there, but that there was, apparently they all kind of had a likeness of a man. What I mean by that is they must have stood like a man. They had the body of a man, but their faces were different. And there were some other differences too, and we'll find out that in verse 7. And their feet were straight feet. Oh, excuse me, I skipped over it. And everyone had 4 faces, and everyone had 4 wings. Now that's a little bit different because they had... Never mind. One place it sounds like 4 wings, another place it sounds like 6 wings. But the thing is, 2 of them were tandem. You know, some of them were covering, some of them were for flying, and the other ones were covering their body. And so that some way or another it interprets to 4. So everyone had 4 wings, and their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a cow's foot. And that's not a man's foot, right? That would be a cloven foot, right? Like a cow, I guess. And they sparkled like the color of burnished brass, and they had the hands of a man under their wings on their 4 sides, and they 4 had their faces and their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went everyone straight forward, as in the likeness of their faces they 4 had. Now this I was wanting to get to, and that you could understand and see. This is the face of a man and the face of a lion. And on the right side, and they had all 4 had the face of an ox, and on the left side they also had the face of an eagle. So they had 4 likenesses: that of a man, that of a lion, that of an ox, and that of an eagle. Now what we see here, and you'll see it again, the reason I'm going to take a little time with this, not too much, but the 4 faces of Christ. And they are depicted in the 4 Gospels. Matthew depicts Jesus Christ as the King, and therefore he is the lion, the King of beasts. Luke depicts the God as a man, or Son of Man. It is used in the Gospel. The Son of Man, that he would be like a human. Well, obviously Jesus took on human form. And then that was Mark. That was Luke. Mark was a servant. Interesting, throughout the whole book of Mark, almost every sentence begins and straightway, and straightway. The servant's always busy, no time for himself or whatever. And that's how he is depicted there. So we have the lion, the king, the ox, the servant of Jehovah. No lineage for a servant. You don't care. You just want him to be strong, and energetic. And so there's the servant. By the way, the servant's kind of weird, because in another place, God calls him a cherub. the face of a cherub. In other words, that the cherub are servants of God. They are not in the place of man or in the place of God. So the angels are servants of God, messengers of God. And then finally is the book of John, which is deity. He is the eagle. He is the God who took on flesh. So that is the four faces there. Let's skip down now to verse 26 and see what he talks about there is how they traveled, how they went around in the next verses. It's very interesting if you want to read it. Verse 26, and above the firmament, what is the firmament? The firmament is an expanse, an empty space. Instead of all the furniture, there was an empty space, and above the firmament that was over the heads was the likeness of a throne. Now we see the throne of God, the seat, what we would call the mercy seat, the Ark of the Covenant, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. The appearance of sapphire stone, I should have worn my ring, it's a sapphire. I might look like that, but it'd probably bigger. A sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the stone was the likeness of the appearance of a man above upon it. And I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about within it, from the appearance of the loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire. And it had brightness round about. When you speak of glory, you generally refer to brightness or shining. Now we're seeing what is shining and what is bright here. Now, and he goes on, verse 28, as the appearance of the bow in the cloud. Now what are we talking about? The rainbow. The different colors of the rainbow in the cloud on the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the lightness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard a voice as the one that spake. And we might hear more about that voice in a little while. But let's look at chapter 8 of Ezekiel. Chapter 8 of Ezekiel. Some neat stuff before you get there. I would encourage you to read it, but it's a little off the subject, although we may use it someday as a challenge to you because it's more personable and more applicable than what we're reading now. Now we're observing God and some of his likeness. And in chapter 8 of Ezekiel, let's look at verse 2. Then I beheld, and lo, a likeness as the appearance of fire. He's viewing the glory of God again. From the appearance of his loins even down on fire, and from the loins even upward as the appearance of brightness, as the color of amber. Remember, that's what we read just before we saw that we were talking about the glory of God. So we're back in the presence of the glory of God. And but now he's actually not in the river Chebar anymore. He's now back in Jerusalem. And maybe we'll see how that takes place. In fact, in the next verse we do, verses 3 through 5. And he put forth the form of an hand, and took me by the lock of mine head, and the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and the heaven, and brought me into the visions of God in Jerusalem, now where was he in Jerusalem? Not just in Jerusalem anywhere, to the door of the inner gate that looketh toward the north, to the northern gates. When you walked out of the front of the temple, if you look to your left, that's where he's looking. And it was directly even with when you stepped right out, there was a gate that you could look out. I don't know if it was open, I guess you looked out. And just to the left, this is east, this is north. And that's where he is. And I don't know why that's important, but we read about it quite a bit here. And the door of the inner gate, and look at toward the north now we're in the temple. I don't know if you've discerned that, but we're in the temple now. And what does he see? Was the seat of the image of jealousy, which provoked to jealousy. What's he talking about? Manasseh, when he was king, he was, some say, the most wicked king of Judah that ruled in Jerusalem. And he set up an altar, an idol, in the temple. And that's what we're talking about. which of course God says, I am a jealous God, and thou shalt have no other gods before, and no image before me. And so the image apparently had been preserved. And why had it been preserved? Now, it wasn't right there in the temple anymore. It was in the gateway down the road there, or a little ways from there, on the other side of the court of Gentiles. And why was it preserved? It should have been destroyed, but we'll see right now why it was preserved. And behold, the glory of God of Israel was there. He was at this image of jealousy, that according to the vision that I saw in the plain. Right, it was the same glory that I saw when I was over in Chebar. Now that's kind of interesting. Didn't I say? And maybe I didn't, and if I didn't, good. But I said that the only place on earth where the glory of God was in the temple. But he saw it in Babylonia by the river Chebar. I don't know how that works, but now we're seeing he's not in the Holy of Holies either. The glory of God is there at the image in the gateway there. Then said he unto me, Son of man, lift up thine eyes now and the way toward the north. The way, that would be the road, okay? The way you get in or out or whatever. So I lifted up my eyes and toward the north, and behold, northward at the gate of the altar, this image of jealousy in the entry. So the altar was in the temple, and as he gets to the gate, there is another image, the image that Manasseh had set up, the image of jealousy, that of course was enough to bring the wrath of God on the children of Israel. In fact, let's see what happens. Verse 6, he said, Furthermore unto me, Son of man, seest thou what they do? Even the great abominations that the house of Israel committeth here, that I should go off from my sanctuary, but turn thee yet again, and I'll show you greater abominations. So what is he saying? You see what they're doing here? They're worshiping the wrong image, the wrong God. And so what should I do? Now, if he didn't do anything, if he remained, his glory remained there, where he's sharing his glory with the image of jealousy. And in a sense, he's putting his stamp of approval on that, to where the nations round about would look at the temple in Jerusalem, and they would look at the city Jerusalem and the temple there as the image, where we go and we worship the image of jealousy. Now, I don't know what kind of image it was, but it was enough to make God jealous. And God, he says, I am a jealous God. I'm jealous over you, and you'd better not go after other gods. He called that adultery, when they went after other gods. And consequently, God divorced the children of Israel. And that's what we're in the midst of right here. You know any divorced people? Oh, God's a divorced person. So I hope you know him. Verse truth. And he brought me to the door of the court, and when I looked, behold, a hole in the wall. Now, he's already seen that one. Let's see what else he sees. All right, he's coming in, and he sees a hole in the wall. And then said he unto me, Son of man, dig now in the wall. By the way, that wasn't really usually very hard in an inward wall. The walls on the outside were huge stones. You couldn't do that there. But on an inward wall, they were made of dried bricks, and it was not uncommon to dig through them. The Bible talks about thieves digging through the wall of the house at night and getting your stuff and absconding with them. So you could do that if you had the right tools. Digged in the wall, behold, a door was there. And he said unto me, Go in, and behold the wicked abominations that they do here. So I went and saw, and behold, every form, now what do we see here? Every form of creeping things, and of abominable beasts, and all the idols of the house of Israel. Now, why is that significant? Because we're not in the house of Israel. We are in the house of the Lord in Judea. Israel was set up in Samaria, and they worshipped false gods. I mean, very early on, they started into idol worship. They started worshiping a golden calf and proclaimed it as the worshiping of Jehovah. And by the way, who did that first? To our knowledge, it was a fellow named Aaron, the high priest and brother of Moses. He says, behold the God that brought you out of Egypt. Let's worship Jehovah together. And he built a golden calf. It's interesting. Worshiped Jehovah as a golden calf. But at any rate, here we see all kinds of creeping things, an abominable beast, and the worship of animals. What do we call that today? And I'm not stretching this in any way, shape, or form. We call that evolution. Evolution. Evolution has a highest form of existence of animal life, and that is man. So what is it? The worship of man. Why do people, I mean, if you study even a little bit about evolution, you find that it's pretty ridiculous. Most of your scientists, if they're not afraid to speak out, and most are, they don't believe in evolution. You ought to watch, what is it, the guy that said expelled, no intelligence required, or something like that. What was that? I don't know. Stein? Ben Stein. Yeah, he's a red-eyed guy. You know, the guy that, wow, you know. And he did a very good thing about how that there is actually literally a conspiracy to shut up the scientists that would speak out for creation. And so in the worship of creation, why is it that anybody would believe such a thing? Let me ask you this. If you've got a dog and you breed your dog, what are you going to get? Another dog. Okay. When you take that dog and you breed it with another dog, what are you going to get? Another dog. And then 8 generations down the road, what are you going to get? A dog. Now they may look different. All right, you can breed certain ways, but they may look different. The most popular breed of dog, and you almost never see them because they're ugly as a mud fence, but is the Chihuahua. Now, the very beautiful dog. It's a beautiful animal, the Chihuahua. But that's where you get your miniatures, because they breed all the bigger breeds with the Chihuahua to get the little ones. And they're the cutest ones there ever were, you know. And if you could just bypass the Chihuahua. I love miniature dogs. But the thing is, you always get a dog of some kind. Now, why is that? Because of genes and chromosomes. When I don't care how you breed, selective breeding, whatever, you still have the same genes and chromosomes. You just emphasize a different gene, you see. I kind of like Levi's myself, but or Wranglers or whatever. But so you get the same thing, you see. Well, it's the truth, actually. But the thing, and why is it that they believe such absurdity? It's very simple. Because they don't want to believe in creation. Because they don't want to believe in God. You see? And so what's the next best thing? Well, let's elevate man to the highest form of creation, evolution. So you see what I'm saying here. And that's what's happening here. It's literally what's happening here. You can read about it in Romans chapter 1 also. So went in and saw, and behold, every form of creeping things and of abominable beasts and all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed upon the wall round about here in Judea. We're not in Israel anymore. And there stood before them 70 men of the ancients of the house of Israel. By the way, they were in hiding. That's how come he had to dig through the wall and find a door. Kind of in the basement, underneath the wall or something. And in the midst of them stood Jehazaniah, the son of Shaphan, and every man his censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. And then said he unto me, Son of man, hast thou seen? How many people was it? Was it 70 people? They're in a compartment of the temple. Hast thou seen what the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark? Every man in the chambers of his imagery. Chambers of his imagery. Chamber is like a room. Imagery is where we get the idea of imagination. We like to stimulate children's imagination through movies and stuff like that. And just love, think imagination. You don't want someone that's unimaginative. But God always, every place I can think of, and I can think of a bunch, equates imagination with evil. Every imagination, the first judgment on man, as far as the flood, which the imagination of their heart was only evil from their youth up. And that's what you call the first mention principle. The first time it's mentioned is true the rest of the way through the Bible. Imagination is, we're to cast down imaginations, according to 2 Corinthians 10, and every evil thought. So we're supposed to, but he says, in their imagery, for they say, the Lord doesn't see us. The Lord has forsaken the earth. He's not here anymore. He's over in Chebar. And he said unto me, now, okay, so we've got the worship of nature. We've got the worship of an idol of what was it, jealousy? Okay, to make God jealous. And now let's see what else has taken place. Verse 14, then he brought me in by the door of the gate of the Lord's house. Okay, we're back at the gate of the Lord's house. It leads right into the temple, now on the north side. House which was toward the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. I don't know why it was the women that weep for him, except I guess he was a male. He was a man, and he was in love with Ishtar. Ishtar was, it depends on where you read, but Ishtar was where we get the pagan feast that happens every year. You might be familiar with it. It's called Easter. The pagan feast of Easter, which is symbolized by the egg. You might call it the Ishtar egg or Easter egg, and the bunny. You might call it the Ishtar bunny or the Easter bunny. These things were sexual objects. The egg, the symbol of fertility, but the bunny was a symbol of reproduction. And so, and the idea was spring. It was a time of springing things growing back. Well, who was Tammuz, or Tammuz as it's in the Bible? Who was Tammuz? Tammuz was the guy that was the god, if you will, of spring, of growth, of nature. And so now we've got the worship of nature. We call it today the Green New Deal. Not necessarily, but when April was just turned 16, there was a nice song on the radio. It had to do with living life upside down. Anybody remember anything about that? Okay, it talks about that a person will love a tree and hug a tree and yet kill babies. I don't know why they go together, but they seem to. The same person that's a tree hugger is also a baby killer. They would opt for oil producing or nuclear producing electricity over hydroelectric power because they might kill a fish, a blue darter. Remember, there was another one where they stopped all production that would help mankind. Where we get our wood products, paper, building materials because of an owl, a spotted owl. Point is, they're worshiping the Green New Deal. Now they're wanting to even do away with, well, never mind. You can think of things, and I'm waxing too political. Verse 15, then said he unto me, hast thou seen this, the Son of Man, O Son of Man? Turn yet again, and thou shalt see greater things in the worship of nature. And he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, okay, where are we? We're still in the temple, but now we're in the east side of the temple, where the eastern gate was, where the front door of the temple was. And what do we see there? 20 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord. They're in the, remember that eastern gate, that went outside. It's the only one of the gates, or the direction of gates, that went outside the city. When you entered the eastern gate, you came directly into the court of the Gentiles, which was part of the temple. And what also is on the other side of the eastern gate? Well, there's the Mount of Olives, and what comes up over the Mount of Olives? The sun. The sun. And so they've got their back to the Shekinah glory, and they're watching for the sun. And let's see what he says here. And then said he unto, and he brought me into the inner court of the, I'm on verse 16, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the pillar, or altar, excuse me, the altar where they sacrificed, were about 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east, and they worshipped the sun toward the east. So here in the temple of Jehovah is sun worship and nature worship and the worship, the astrology, the sun, and everything. So you've got Tammuz and the worship of nature. Then said he unto me, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? Is it a light thing to the house of Judah that they commit these abominations, which they commit here? For they have filled the land with violence. They have, as we learned when we were studying Lamentations, why were they conquered? It was because of their own sin. But who did the conquering? Who did the conquering? God. He said that he would put a yoke of iron upon them in Deuteronomy until he has destroyed them. Verse 18, Therefore will I go deal in fury, mine eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. And though they cry in mine ears with a loud voice, yet will I not hear them anymore. Let's go over now to chapter 20. We're not going to read as much of chapter... you turn to chapter 20. Now turn to chapter 10, which is just on the next page. Chapter 10. Sorry about that. And we're going to start in verse 4. Then the glory of the Lord. There's the glory of the Lord. Went up from the cherub and stood over the threshold of the house. Okay, here's the deal. He already told us why he's leaving. I'm leaving because of all this idolatry, all this false worship, all this heresy, all this blasphemy. I'm leaving because this place has been known because of their worship of nature, because of the worship of Tammuz, because of the worship of the sun, because of the worship of that idol. And that's what everybody knows here. And so I'm leaving. And there's another reason I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave because this place has been polluted by false worship and heresy. I'm going to leave because of that. There's not room for me here. And I'm going to leave. And also, why not? Because the next day or two it's going to be destroyed. It's going to be cut down to the ground. And I won't be able to stay here anyway. Because there won't be a mercy, because in just a few days the Babylonians are going to come in here and they are going to go into the Holy of Holies, and they are going to take the gold and the accoutrements and all the things and carry them away into Babylon. And so there I won't have a house anymore. See, and so I'm not going to dwell there. So I'm going to leave now. At least that's kind of what we're getting the idea. Let's see what he says. And the glory of the Lord went up from the cherub, and we know where the cherub were. They were over the Ark of the Covenant, and stood over the threshold of the house. So he left the Holy of Holies, and he goes to the threshold. The threshold is why? What is it? Threshold? It's the doorway, right? And that is where we saw 2 of the 3 abominations. There are 3 of the 4 abominations. At any rate, they're in the north side in the threshold. And so he stays there in the threshold. The house was filled with a cloud, and the court was filled with brightness, full of brightness of the Lord's glory. In verse 15, jump over there. So he's left the Holy of Holies, but he hadn't left town yet. He's tarrying them at the doorway to the temple, in the threshold. See, he doesn't want to leave. I could just get enough people to worship me and put these other things away. But let's see what happens. And the cherubims were lifted up. This is a living creature that I saw by the river Chebar. And when the cherubims went, the wheels, which we would have read in chapter 1, had we read it all, went up by them. And when the cherubims lifted up their wings to mount up from the earth, the same wheels also turned not from them. And when they stood, these stood. When they were lifted up, these were lifted up themselves also, for the spirit of the living creature was in them. Then the glory of the Lord departed from above the threshold. That means he left town. He left the eastern gate, or he left the temple area. And he actually didn't leave town. He went throughout the town and he put seals on people. And the people with a seal, they were going to die. People without the seal, they were going to be preserved and carried away into captivity. And so that's where we are. Then the glory of the Lord departed from off the threshold of the house and stood over the cherubims. So the cherubims had left and he went over. He's above them now instead of them overshadowing him. And the cherubims lifted up their wings and mounted up from the earth in the sight of when they went out, and wheels went beside them. And everyone stood at the door of the east gate. So they're all now in the east gate. They're not in the north gate anymore, the east gate of the Lord's house. And that's the one that leaves town. And the glory of the God of Israel was over them above. And then this is the living creature that I saw under the God of Israel by the river Chebar. And I knew that they were the cherubims that I had seen there. Everyone had 4 faces. This is how you recognize them. A piece. And everyone 4 wings, and the likeness of the hands of a man was under the wings. And the likeness of their faces was the same faces that I saw by the river Chebar. Their appearance and themselves, they were everyone straight forward. And I just wanted you to see that that was the same glory that we were introduced to in chapter 1. That's the reason I read those last several verses, so that you can know we're still talking about the glory of the Lord. Remember in the last verses there of chapter 1, he says, this is the glory of the Lord. And so this was the glory of the Lord in the eastern gate. Now let's see what happens. Now, in the midst of all this, what's going to take place? We already know that because we studied Lamentations. The city and the sacrifice is going to cease. The city is going to be destroyed, and the temple is going to be destroyed. They're going to be looted, and the remnant of the people are going to be carried away captive, except some that are kind of left behind, and they go to Egypt. And Jeremiah was one that went to Egypt. So that the destruction is coming. Let's see if there's a little good news here, though. We've had enough bad. Verse 17. Therefore say, thus saith the Lord God, I will even gather you from the people and assemble you out of the countries where you have been scattered. So everybody's going to be gone from Jerusalem and from Judea, and I will give you, but I'm going to gather you from all those nations where you've been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. That's encouraging because it's happened, but it's not over yet, because there's a couple other things here. Let's look down verse 22. Then the cherubims lift up their wings, and the wheels beside them, and the glory of the God of Israel was above them. I'm in chapter 11 still. Verse 23, and the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood upon the mountain, which is on the east side of the city. That's the mountain of the Mount of Olives. And remember when Jesus left Bethphage, where he picked up the donkey, and he paused on the Mount of Olives up there, which overlooks the city. And you see many pictures from the Mount of Olives, probably. And there, right in front of you, is the eastern gate, which, by the way, is closed. It's walled closed, so nobody can go in and out of that gate anymore, by the way. And Jesus stopped there and he wept over Jerusalem, because if you had known in this thy day the things which are in store for you, but where every stone shall be taken one off of another, that shall not be thrown down. And that happened in AD 70 when Titus destroyed the city. So the cherubim were lifted up. Look, verse 23. And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood upon a mountain which on the east side of the city. And afterwards the Spirit took me up and brought me in the vision, the Spirit of God, into Chaldea, Babylonia, Chaldees. And so the glory of the Lord left Jerusalem and Israel, never to return until He returns in our future. He never came back to the temple. They rebuilt the temple. He didn't come back. And in 70 AD, they destroyed the temple. They have now, and were scattered throughout the world again. Now, the nation is back. The temple is not. And the glory of the Lord has not entered therein. Now, I want to give you the good news. We're going to skip what it says in Revelation. You might take your outlines and read those things. They're very interesting and very applicable. But let's look over Ezekiel chapter 44. That eastern gate, just so you know, when Jesus came down off the Mount of Olives, there he was riding a donkey, and everybody were waving palm fronds and strewing their clothes in front of him, so that he, you know, they would say, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." And so, and you can read about that in Zechariah chapter 11, verse 1 through 3. Chapter 9, verse 9, I think it is. And chapter 11 is his betrayal for 30 pieces of silver. But in Ezekiel chapter 44, let's see what he has to say here in verse 1. Then he brought me back by the way of the outward sanctuary. The outward sanctuary, which is soon to be destroyed? No. It's a new sanctuary. A new eastern gate. And a new temple. And he brought me back, but he's been showed the New Jerusalem kind of there. And he says, and he brought me back by the outward sanctuary, which looketh toward the east, and it was shut. It is today, by the way. It is still shut. It is walled shut. And it has been for hundreds of years, over 1,000 years, it has been shut. And no man is able to walk through it. Why? I don't know. Then actually I do. So I'll read it to you, okay? Then said the Lord unto me, This gate shall be shut. It shall not be open, and no man shall enter in by it, because, and I ask why? Well, here it is. The Lord, the God of Israel, hath entered in by it, therefore it shall be shut. When God came the first time, that's the gate he would use. The eastern gate, which entered directly into the temple area. And he would go outside. There was a bridge out there. He'd go across the Brook Kidron, go through over the Mount of Olives, through the Garden what was the garden out there? Gethsemane, Garden of Gethsemane. He'd go through the Garden of Gethsemane over the Mount of Olives, and then he'd stay in Bethany, which is on the backside of the Mount of Olives. And so he says, well, I've used that gate, and now it's shut, and nobody's going to use it but me. And until I come back. It is for the prince. That's the reason it's shut. The prince, he shall sit in it. Prince. What prince? For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. He's the heir to the throne of Israel. He was a crown prince on his father's side, his earthly adoptive father's side through Joseph, and through his mother's side, who he was a crown prince. He, on either side, could inherit the throne. There's not a person on earth today that has the lineage to be the prince or king of Israel. Only Jesus. But wait a minute, what about his lineage? It was the only lineage that was not destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. Why? Why didn't they destroy his lineage? Because it's right here. Both Mary and Joseph's lineage are here, proving that he is a descendant of David. That Jesus is a descendant of David. So it says, it is for the prince. The prince, he shall sit in it to eat bread before the Lord. He shall enter by the way of the porch of the same, porch of that gate, and shall go out by the way of the same. Then brought he me to the way of the north gate before the house, and I looked, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord, and I fell upon my face. The glory of the Lord's coming back, but He's coming back when Jesus comes back. And if you're not ready, well, you better get ready. So how do you get ready? Well, actually, it might behoove you to read Roman numeral 5 and 6. I'm going to just give you a little overview here. What we need to do, we won't be here whenever any more destruction is going to take place, because the rapture of the church comes the next thing in biblical history, or prophecy. And that is when all believers are taken up to heaven to avoid the day of wrath, the wrath which is coming on the earth. And I don't want to be here for that. And so I've done what it takes to get to heaven. What is that? I worked real hard and I dedicated. No. I may have, I don't know. But it has nothing to do with anything I do at all. It has to do only with what Jesus did 2,000 years ago. It doesn't have anything to do with anything that anybody does from now until eternity. Because everything has been done required to get us to heaven. That's why Jesus could say, "It is finished." He finished the requirement for our entrance into heaven. But you have to believe it. You have to trust Him. Trust Him as completing the task and God who did it. That's what His name actually means. We're supposed to believe on the name of the Son of God. His name is Jehovah Yasha. Jehovah the Jah, the Almighty. You must believe that Jesus is the Almighty. The Hova, the Everlasting One. You must believe that Jesus is the Everlasting Father, and that He is the Yasha. The Yasha is the one who saves and keeps. So you believe that He saves you, and you believe that He can. What do you have to do to do that? When you believe on His name, 1 John 5:13 says this: "These things are written unto you that believe on the name of the Son of God." And then what's the results of that? When you believe, then you can know that you have eternal life, and that you believe on the name of the Son of God. So He wants us to know. He doesn't want you to have to worry about where you go when you die. What does He want you to do? He wants you to know that you're going to heaven, that you won't have to go through all these things. We'll always be going through stuff, okay? But we know that He's coming back, the glory of God's returning, and we have the eternal life and the millennium and heaven to look forward to.